Now, I don't know if there's anything that stirs people's imagination, maybe with the exception of Spitfires, than a P-51 Mustang, and that's going to be the theme for our whole building program in the building season to come. Now, if you're a regular subscriber or you've been a subscriber for years, you know we've built 3 Spitfires, 1 a Seafire. On video, we've done a lot of experimental things, a lot of unique things. And previous to that, we had built Strega, the Red Baron, and Tsunami Reno Air Racers, and we're going to return to that theme, one of my favorites, by the way. And I'm going to back this up just a little bit so you can get an idea about what our plans are for the building season. We have a very, very complex building season ahead. We may or may not accomplish everything we set out to do, but I know if we don't try to do it, it guarantees we won't do it at all. So let's get down to shop and get started. Let me lay out a little program of what we hope to accomplish over this building season. Now, the first of the ships that I made, the Red Baron, this was my first attempt at a Reno Air Racer. Second one was Tsunami. Third one was Strega. All of these are in some way loosely based, very loosely in fact, on a P-51. That overall look of a P-51 is something that appeals to a lot of people. They've had various amounts of semi-scaleism. In the case of the Red Baron, had the cuff and the wing, and Tsunami had the scoops, Strega had basically just the paintwork. But from this whole group of airplanes now, we want to take this to the next level, and I want to go about this in a very methodical way. Now, one of the things I want to try to do this year, and again, these plans change from second to second. The way this originally evolved, Joe and I together, Joe Adamusco, of course, had built the whole series of Spitfire planes, a total of 5 planes, 5, each one a unique entity. And what Joe originally started out is, we had started out with the idea in mind of making an almost semi-scale P-51, very similar to Al Rabe's planes, with dihedral, just roughly make this, and the large landing gear, the semi-scale, all the little things that go along with the semi-scale program. Now that evolved into, from Joe doing research, because you'll hear this over and over on the video, Miss Ashley. Miss Ashley is a swept wing variant of the P-51. It's got a P-51 type body and Learjet wings. It's called a Lear Stang. It's a one-of-a-kind airplane. It's not a production airplane. Now, unfortunately, our plan had changed from the relatively scale P-51 to a Miss Ashley variant. And I wasn't sure, a lot of the things that I was unsure about, the dihedral, the control systems, how we were going to, if we were going to use a tune pipe on a P-51, it would be difficult if it was very scale, and would I be able to put it above the wing? There was a lot of question marks at the end of each one of our discussions. And so this project sat in limbo a big part of the summer. And then what happened is, I had gone to the team trials with Strega. And I had been doing a lot of test flying with the GMA 50, GMA 60. And what I wanted to do is, at the end of the season, this plane was really getting tired. This poor Strega, I hate to even say it, he was really turning into a beat-up warhorse. And so what I decided to do is, at the end of the season, before I went into one of these very complex, either one of these very complex planes, what I wanted to do is make a replacement. A plane that was basically similar to Strega, but had a little bit more of the P-51 flavor. Now at this time, Kent Tyser had come up with some really nice drawings. And see, we really have a lot of accessory items here that we can put in. I'm just going to rough this out. On a more scale-like Strega, one of the things that, if it's a traditional stunt ship, and again, we're going to start out with this premise, we have a real nice canopy mold that Dan Banjock did the carving on, so we have that piece of the puzzle that we didn't have at the time we built Strega, if we decide to go in that direction. We also have a lot of airfoil technology now that Joe has turned up in Contact and Al-Rabe, and in doing some Rabe airfoils. We have a complete set of Rabe airfoils. And so what I wanted to do this year, and these are the changes, I wanted to re-engineer the wing using a Rabe airfoil as my first order of business, and that's going to be the first part of this project. I want to use, now Joe Adamusco did, I mean, just an incredible amount of research into this. He had people at Boeing checking it out. He has a friend or two at Boeing helping him with this. But basically the two big changes that this preliminary plane will have is the Rabe airfoil and the fact that we have other choices of canopies. Now, what I thought about doing, because, and picture how this evolved, what I wanted to do, I want to make a carbon fiber body too. So rather than make two wings, one of the things I thought I could do is, if I make a replaceable wing similar to Paul Walker, or similar to seeing how successful Casminato's carbon wing was, it really got me going on this. If I made a replacement wing, I could possibly, and again the plans for this may change, but this is how we started off this project. We can build one wing, one tail possibly even, or maybe two. And by switching fuselages right at the field, we then can tell now the reason I think this would be a realistic way of doing it is, looking back at Strega, the reason I need a replacement, the wing and tail are still fine, but the body, the fuselage, the cowling is all deteriorated up here. Everywhere the pipe tunnel is, it's all deteriorated. The wood is so oil soaked you can't even put composite over the top of it. The body is cracked back here. It's basically what I'd like to be able to do is take the wing and the tail out of Strega and go mold up another body or build another body. And by the way, this is how I'm sure other people, Paul Walker, people that make take apart planes, one of the advantages is when you go to build a new plane, you don't have to build a whole plane. So we're going to try to make part of this project, we're going to begin with the premise that hopefully we can make a replacement wing with a Rabe airfoil and two fuselage assemblies that'll fit the same plane. They'll have a P-51 flavor and be relatively, well, let's put it this way, straight wing, no dihedral, no real intricate paintwork. This will be our bread and butter plane. But then once that original plane is completed, and it'll have two fuselages, once this part of the project is completed, assuming, and I'm getting a little carried away here, but you have to be a little carried away to do this kind of research work, assuming that the carbon fiber body is not in some way undoable, and I cannot picture right now that it's undoable, it just may be very expensive and very time consuming, then I feel that this opens the door. You got to picture this. This opens the door to the final project, and I would assume this is going to be sometime after Christmas, that if we arrive at this, to doing relatively full-scale Mustang type of fuselage with kind of an Al-Rabe dihedral deal. Now, this is a real important part of why I think this is a good choice. And let me go through this before we actually start cutting wood. On a standard stunt ship, what happens is the body, even the body sides, and you include the top block, what happens when you make the cutaway for the wing, here's what really happens. And if you follow through with this, you have this and some bolts holding it in, of course, but right here is usually a weak point. That's usually a problem with some or all of take-apart planes, or can be a problem. On a relatively scale Mustang, what's different? The wing is sticking out the bottom of the body. So you only have to deal with this little piece here. Now look at the difference. The amount, the total amount of structure, and of course the canopy, but you have all this structure in a low-mounted plane, a low-wing plane. So if the carbon works out for us in the very beginning, and this of course would have a dihedral angle in it, and by the way, we're hoping Al Rabe is going to join us, at least in spirit, on this project with some of his expertise and inventive ability. But what happens is you have a much thicker part that makes a take-apart plane more practical. Now, if the carbon fiber fuselage works out well, then this can be a mold, and I will spend an extreme amount of time and energy to make this the best possible mold it can be for a full semi-scale ship with dihedral, the large landing gear, a molded carbon fiber body, maybe make our own four-bladed props. Again, more and more coming up on that. But it's going to be a step by step by step, and the reason I spent this couple of minutes to explain this is the logic so far of what we're trying to do. A reason is engines. Now, years ago, engines were less powerful. Maybe there's two L's in powerful, I don't know. Nah, there's only one. But the other thing is they had more inherent vibration. Now, modern engines, and the whole slew of them, you can pick any one you want. Modern engines run at a relatively higher RPM, have less vibration, and make more power. So one of the possibilities is that I'm hoping is with the composite construction, I might ultimately, and you know, of course this can all change, I might ultimately be able to supply a shell where a person, all they would have to do is build a wing and a tail, I mean in its worst thing, and this part, this whole part, could already be molded in one piece or in halves. And what it would allow us to do is, let's say for instance, Joe Adamusco wants to build the same plane. Well, we can make him a fuselage, we can mold it up in a relatively short time. Let's say Al Rabe wants to make one of these puppies. Hey, let's say anybody does. Gerald Champ has shown an interest in this project. Gerald Champ sent me that P-51 that's almost completely built except for the wing, and we could use that as a basis or a plug for making the actual mold. But one of the things that makes this possible, years ago, I don't know if the vibration and power levels would have lended themselves to composite construction. But I know, given the fact that we've got so much time on Strega with the jet and the PA is relatively similar in vibration and power output, one of the things, it gives me a lot of confidence that possibly this can evolve into a very, very interesting winter of building. So if you're on board for the first time, if this is the first time you've ever seen a Windy video, and I know now the people overseas that are receiving the videos, please pass them around. Please feel free to send me pictures of your projects so we can keep the whole world similar to Stunt News. We can keep everybody updated on what's new in the world of stunt. How perfect this is for a take-apart plane, this whole piece of structure, this whole structure up here. And I've even dreamed in my wildest dream of making a special, now that I can make tune pipes any shape, size, angle I want, of making a special pipe that could run up in the fuselage and come back down the other side. Again, don't know, or would possibly, because the jet engine and the PA have such tremendous power, one of the possibilities we have is just to make a big muffler out of carbon fiber here with tubes coming out. We have so many choices. That's what's nice about entering a whole new building season. And when we started this Spitfire project, and I was real happy that every one of these planes has won the Concourse Award. The Seafire won twice. And I was real happy to have a phone in the shop that I can answer the phone. You're going to hear this going constantly because we're in a very busy time of the year. Let me get the phone. Now, when we started this Spitfire project, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do any molding at all. Well, over that 5-year period, we've developed our molding techniques to where we make our own props, we make our own exhaust manifolds, we make our own landing gear, we make all our own shells. We're pretty much a self-contained unit right now and make our own spinners. So what it does, it allows us a lot more flexibility in planning this Mustang project. It gives us options that we normally wouldn't have if it weren't for molding. And this whole thing is based around the premise that if we can mold this part and make it a lot more effective, that shorter amount of hours will produce a better part, then it's successful. If it takes more hours, well, then maybe it is and maybe it isn't. That would be in the eye of the beholder. But if I go back and look at the Spitfire time, the years that I spent building these planes, hundreds and hundreds of hours, what I come away with is it was like going to school. And I hope I've graduated, or at least that I'm on the list for graduation this year. And to make the big move into true composite aircraft technology. And of course, our hats off to the master, one of the masters of semi-scale, Al Rabe. You've been very inspirational. I appreciate the feedback. He sent us plans to work from, airfoils, and some beautiful pictures that we have hanging all around the shop now. And I don't know how many people, I know Billy Werwidge is building a Bearcat. Well, that's kind of a really neat thing, and I can't wait to see it. But boy, when I think back, how many people used to just drool over these Mustangs. And I hope even our baseline plane, our very simple experimental plane that we're going to make with the straight wing, I hope that even comes away with the Mustang flavor this year. Anyway, and as always, the first part of this, these are Al Rabe's original plans. First part of anything, since we're going to be making a straight line plane, we need to get, and Joe Adamusco has already sent them here, enlarged versions of this, 8.5 and 11 inches, so we can lay out our straight line wing using Al Rabe's original airfoil and flap shapes. And of course, Joe's got this laid out in complete scale. This is for the dihedral wing. We're going to be making a straight line wing, but we're going to use this. You can see how much different this is, say, than a Paul Walker or a Cardinal or an SV11. It's a radically, in my book anyway, radically different airfoil. And I'm going to, right from the very beginning of this tape, I'm going to make all new templates. I'll be more than happy to loan those templates to anybody, but we're going to try to use those same templates over and over again for as many people as are going to be joining us in this project. If you haven't visited our website, give it a shot. There's some nice pictures out there. So if you're a new subscriber, this is basically what we always try to accomplish, is to build. That's the thrust of most videos, but we also try to show photos. So please feel free to send your photos in. Send them in so we can see what everybody's building. We also have what I call shop projects. Now we're making belt crank molds, making tune pipes, making propellers, making various other bits and pieces, and testing. So you get a general idea of what this series of videos would evolve. And we always have the ability to go back all the way to 1987, old videos. A lot of times people have passed away and I have them on video, or old nationals that you might have flown in. We always can get copies of these old tapes. They're always in our library. And we always try to include, I'll just make it things. Now we never know what things are, since we're working on this house constantly, but little projects we do around the house. Because I know the reality is a lot of women out there have to sit in bed with their husband and watch windy videos, and they enjoy that part of it a lot. So anyway, with no further ado, let's get to work. Now we're going to begin the actual construction of the first plane of this season with making up the wing ribs. Now off camera, I guess about a week ago, we had an afternoon where we weren't too busy, and I wound up starting making the templates. That's on tape 176, but I didn't get very far because various other things happening around here. But I want to continue and pick up from this point on. Now from this point, we've taken Al Rabe's airfoil that Joe has enlarged and made some subtle changes to it because we're not going to have a kerf in the wing on our straight line, similar to Miss Ashley, which we'll call the Leerstang wing. But what we did wind up doing, we wound up just roughing out the first half of the templates, and I have to pick it up from this point on. If you're going to actually go back and follow this whole thing, you need tape 176 also, but again, we're going to start with the templates, pick it up from this point on, and start cutting. We may even get a set of ribs cut today, I don't know. And give you an idea of the change that we're actually making to the airfoil. Not very significant, but it is an amount that's worth taking into account, certainly. So if you're going to be building along with us, you're certainly going to want to have a set of the new ribs, the new templates, and the new plans. But for right now, what we want to do is finish up the work we need to do to get these templates ready to carve a set of ribs, and we may be able to get that done in this session. Again, this is a way that's been developed, I think, by Joe Adamusco. And we've cut up some pieces of threaded rod. We've made a little tool off camera that was on tape 176, by the way, for making up the notches. And if you've never made a set of ribs for an original plane of your own design, or of, of anything really, this would be an interesting exercise for you. And you want to make sure, of course, and for our original set of ribs, I'm not going to be too fussy about the wood quality. I'm just going to go over to the rack and pick out some pieces of wood, sandwich in 15 pieces of wood in here, rough cut them out, because that original set is going to be strictly a set of templates. In other words, the original set we're going to make, we're not going to use as a set of ribs. We're just going to use as a set of templates for tracing out the ribs. So when we're done, like that set I just showed on camera, we'll have the original set of templates also. And by the way, it costs less than $1 to make this whole gizmo up, and you can make all the ribs you ever wanted to have in your whole life. This is the first handy use we have for our the cutting pad, the XL Hobby Blades cutting pad. First thing I always like to do is look around, because other people in the shop, of course, use this. And any CA that's on here, and CA seems to stick pretty well to these pads, get it off because it tends to dent everything up. Before we actually start cutting, I want to have as clean a pad as possible. First thing I like to do, I go through whatever supply of wood I have, pick out anything that looks even remotely sea-grained, because I want to have all the sea-grained wood. In other words, to make my little templates, I can use up any wood. It won't matter if it's hard, light, soft. But whenever I get across, and I usually go through quite a few sheets, I want to find this one looks like it's sea-grained down at one end. I want to save the sea-grain, and I'm not worrying about the weight of the wood at all. I'm more concerned with is it sea-grain. Now this is oh, that's a nice piece right there. Again, when you go through enough of it, here's another nice one. But the first step of any of this rib making process is to get all the sea-grain out of the pack. You can use the A-grain up certainly on other things, but and if you're real lucky, a lot of times you order 100 sheets of wood, 50 or whatever, and you get a nice chunk of it. In this case, I'm lucky we had that right in the beginning. It looks like they cut a sea-grain block. But you never know when you're going to get it. But it's the single most important thing when making ribs is, if at all possible, not to even worry about the lightweight of the wood, because there's so little wood when you're done. There's a piece we could probably use on that end. But I don't want to waste it on templates. What I want to do is I want to certainly use it up. Use whatever I can as far as for the actual ribs of the plane. Use up whatever sea grain I can come across here. It's pretty typical of what I normally get on a wood order. This amount looks like it's usable sea grain for ribs, but I'm going to save that at all costs. I'm going to put this aside now so it just doesn't get into the mix. I got another pack that looks fine for, certainly for sheeting foam wings or whatever. And another pack that's a little bit on the, well, not primo side. It's got check marks in it and stuff. So I'll use up this wood to make my original set of what is going to be patterns, and then from those patterns make ribs onto the sea grain wood. Now, it might even be desirable. I'm just thinking things that might be desirable. If you had a bunch of pieces that were like 12-pound wood, it might even pay, because we're going to use them for templates. I'm not going to order special wood. You really don't have to. Ordinarily, in an ordinary shipment of wood, you get plenty that's hard enough. But if you're going to make a permanent set of templates, you may as well use up again. Just use up the hardest, straightest wood that you can, because you're going to be using them over and over again. I'll tape these pieces together, save these for ribs, put this aside for when we actually get to cut ribs, save all the sea grain. That's a good use for it. You really don't need it for, you know, for the templates. Now let me make a real good suggestion. This is what I've done in the past, is I've tried to lay out ribs so I get one extra rib per sheet. Never seems to work the way I want it to anyway, because the grain of the wood is going on another angle. As soon as moisture hits it, it tends to lose its shape a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is put a center line right down the middle, just an eyeball center line, and make sure that I'm running with the grain of the wood. And then from that center line, I can trace out all my parts. Now I need pieces. I need 30 pieces altogether, and I need them to all be at least as big as the biggest template. I don't need them. I really don't need all the wood down here. And I know you could go like this and you could try to get that extra piece out, but I think in the long run it's just counterproductive. So what I'm going to do is, using that center line, I'm going to trace these a little bit oversized, make myself up just what amounts to be a little pattern. And I don't want to even cut off the bottom, because that'll help hold it straight while I'm doing the carving. So now that I have this piece, I can get myself out. And of course, right now is a good time to be putting in a new blade. Get rid of the old blade. Well, one of the things I always do is, right in the beginning of any building project, pay the price, get a whole box of blades. There's nothing that makes building models more of a pain than when you're trying to use up old blades and chewing up the wood and making a mess out of it. That's funny, I see a lot of people that have nice fancy knife handles, but the blades are dull. No, the blade is what counts. So without even fooling around, I'm just going to cut myself up 30 of these pieces. Just rough them out. That's all I need to do right now. Make sure that they're big enough. Make one here and see that I'm not cheating myself. Cut them oversized. And I have the center line on there for lining up the little holes. That'll be fine. So I'll just cut 30 of these off camera. Next thing I do is sharpen up a piece of tubing. You can see, just run it on a belt sander. Now what I want to do is I want to lay these out so that I pick up the center line if possible. Then these are just undersized, intentionally undersized by a very small amount. I don't want to drill the holes on a drill press. I want to get them very accurate if possible, so that when I flip the templates I don't have a lot of slop in the holes. So now what I do, I start with the small side, which of course They have exactly the same hole, and one by one, as I put the holes on, I can stack them, and I'll just be building up a little stack of these as I cut them. And of course the other side, the big side, will go on the other side when I'm finished. A couple of tips that'll help you out. Number one is to really accurately get these on center, because if you flip them in the center line, if this hole is off center, of course it's a problem. The other thing, once I get the blind nuts on, I leave the side hang out, unless you cut them exactly the right size. Let the side hang out, the big side. That I got to dress that off. The side that the rib is the biggest on. What I'm going to do once I sandwich these in, you don't want to crush them. You just want to get them in, that it's a nice tight sandwich. Now, in the past, what I've done is cut all 30 ribs at once. I'm only going to do 15 because I'm going to use these for patterns. But if you were making these to use as ribs, you could, in theory, do all 30 at once. Just stack it and sand it. Just a little more work. But for right now, I want to have that permanent set of templates. And once I tighten these up, then what I'm going to do is get in here with a pair of pliers and flatten these all down. Because you can imagine when you're sanding, you're always going to catch your fingertip or something on that. Your hands get chewed up enough working on this. Okay, with that all sandwiched together, all these little nibs turned down, and believe me, you just put your fingernail under that one time, and that's it. Now, you could, if you want, I've not found it necessary, you could trim these off, because I'm going to leave these oversized in case I ever want to do the whole set of ribs at one shot. Again, we're not doing it that way because we're trying to do templates. Now what I'm going to do is go over to the vacuum bench, get a brand new number 11 blade, and just start shaving this down little by little by little until I can bring it into a rough contour. And I'm assuming you don't have a vacuum bench. One of the things, another great place for a brand new blade, and I like to just whittle away nice and slow. When you try to rush this, it seems like it's real counterproductive. And when I get real close to the template, I know I don't want to run the blade right into it. Again, a nice thing about this is virtually any design, if you can get the two rib patterns, you can make up the ribs. It's good basic modeling technology that's been in use for, I'll bet you, since George Aldrich was a baby or something like that. For a while, anyway. Maybe since I was a baby. Anyway, just take it very slow until you get right down to the last little bit there. And on how close you want to get, you can take one of these scraper blades. I put a little piece of tape on it because I want to let this eventually just come down and just touch. Make sure I'm not getting too close. Any combination of long blades that'll get that wood removed. You can use a belt sander. There's a lot of different ways. So if you use a belt sander, you got to be real careful that you don't change the shape of the templates. One of the best things I've found is the old Bud McKnight sanding sticks. Now I'm getting real close now, so I'm just getting real close. Where it really gets, now I'm just coming right up on that last little shaving or two, but I don't want to touch the template. I want to get as much off as I can. And I want to leave the last little bit for sanding. But once you gouge this, you've in essence ruined the template. I'll try to get to within maybe a pencil line of the template, but not dig into it. In the trailing edge, I'm just connecting the dots from those two pieces. I'll let the knife bottom out in the template. That pretty much is going to give me the back cut that I need. Again, that's what's nice about having An accurate set of templates makes this real easy. And that's the final little bit I'll do on that with the sanding block. Now I have to pretty much do the same thing in the front. I have to connect the dots. And I can kind of whittle away at it this way. Do that last little bit. Now the rest of that I'll do the sanding block. Notch out this little notched area. It's a lot easier to do that after I get this final sanded in, this whole piece. But that's about how much you can get off in a matter of just maybe 10-15 minutes. And then you're ready to start working, getting that. Just kiss the template ever so softly, but don't change its shape. Now what happened, you can see how rough this is to begin with. As you start, you can kind of feel the template coming into place. Whoop. As soon as I touch it, I try to get the block to move. These are little blocks made out of 1/4-inch plywood that Bob Martens made us years ago. They never wear out. And one of the advantages of doing the ribs this way is you don't get such an accentuated angle, which can distort the airfoil shape if you carry it to the extreme. We won't have that much to true up here when we're all done. The idea is to eventually get it that you're resting the whole block, just kissing both of the templates at the same time. The idea of not sanding into the templates any more than you have to, because in essence every wing would get just a little bit thinner and thinner and thinner. Eventually you'd have a a flat airfoil. To wind up that you don't have a bow in the top. And to double check that again, one of the sanding sticks, just a good way to see if you have any high points. If you're really in doubt, rub some chalk along the top, and when you sand off all the chalk, you know you have it. And this is real old wood model technology. This is, again, been around so long. There's still people, coming into the hobby, or maybe they have never cut a set of ribs. This will be handy information for them. Sure, you can take, again, it's not a real high-tech way of doing things, and what this will show you is all the low spots. Ordinary children's chalk. And if you've got that whole area that you're even removing the material, just kissing the templates down, I would say at that point it's safe to assume that you've got this, that you're connecting the two positions. I know up here we have a little bit of a bow. Just start at one end and take it out on the whole length. The ability of thing you want to take into account is you want to make sure that that'll drop right down and touch both plywoods, because if you had one side flat and one side bowed, the disadvantage would be you'd have a wing where the airfoil would be different on both sides. maybe causing some kind of a trim problem that'd be hard to work out. But once you can get rid of all the chalk and see that you've touched the templates at the same time, it's pretty safe to assume you have one edge done. So we have this relatively nice finish on one side. We've connected the trailing edge pieces, just roughed out the leading edge. Now that I have this side smooth and I know I've connected all the dots and things that I want to have flat, I can score this. Again, I found this is just the easiest way to do this. And if you're real lucky, one by one you can pull these out. And then you can get in there with the sanding block, that little sanding tool that we made up. See, it's just undersized, just enough that we can get in there with the sanding block. And this little tool is so handy to have. Again, if you make the pieces that you just can touch both at the same time, one of the other tricks is you can go get a piece of 1/4 inch and shove it in there and see if it kind of, you don't want it, in other words, the thing you don't want, you won't want it sticking up. Let me get this so close. You don't want it sticking up like that so the sheeting doesn't touch, and you don't want it sinking down so you have a gap there. You lose a little bit of your integrity that way. You can also work that little tool. Let me see if I have the flat spot in here. So these are shaping up, I would say, as quick as anybody could reasonably expect. Now obviously the next step is we need to take this apart and reverse the template so the template is down at the bottom. We don't need to touch the wood. We just need to take the template off one side at a time. I think I probably need a pair of pliers to do this. This is, if I remember right, this is how I got it caught under my fingernail. And the problem is we're running out of time here. We've had so many projects going on in the shop, making tune pipes, making carbon bell cranks, doing all this other stuff, that I can only really allocate a couple hours a day into this new ship at this point in time. But that's going to change in about a month, though. It's kind of choppy. We're going to finish these up tomorrow, but I'll just put the changing of the templates on here for now. Now you'll notice we have that radius, that angle, just a slight angle. Had we put a giant angle in there, we'd be in trouble now. We actually never take the rod out of the wood, the two little pieces of threaded rod. And obviously now, one of the choices we have tomorrow when we come back to work on this, we can lop a lot of this off with a jigsaw. We don't need to even fool with that. But again, with so many projects going on in the shop, I need to allocate so many hours a day to working with the autoclave, so many hours a day into making up carbon parts, so many hours a day into filling orders, and what's left over, these little amounts of time, they're in small chunks, but I usually try to fill each one that I get to a certain point. And that's a good way to do any modeling. Get to a point that you're comfortable with. Again, you really don't need to leave them this long, but this would give us the option of, now if we were really, if we were into this mode of money's no object or something, we could stack up 50 pieces of wood and make 3 or 4 sets at one time. And the variation would be so small, you could just take every third one and make 3 sets. But for right now, this is going to get us a nice set of ribs the next time we come to work on it. The only thing I'm going to do before I quit here tonight is go over to the bandsaw and just lop that off. And tomorrow this will be ready to start doing the second half of carving. And all this will do, just make it a little bit easier tomorrow, less wood to carve away. Obviously work off the big side, not the small side. Yeah, we're not going to be able to do it with the piece of wire there. That just saves us that much needless carving. Tomorrow we'll just repeat all these things over again, and we'll have the ribs roughed out in a matter of about an hour and a half sessions. Okay, today I guess we'll finish carving the ribs. That's one thing we can do. Well, what happens is, and I guess it happens to all modelers, is you get into these gaps where at some points in the year I have gaps of 3 hours, 4 hours at the end of the day to work, or I have gaps in the morning, in the afternoon, or whatever. Right now I have small gaps, so I always try to plan one step at a time rather than trying to plan a giant project, or laying out something, or making some decision. I try to each day plan one small little project. Now if I can finish doing all the carving and sanding and truing up of the ribs today, that'll be a nice thing. I can trace these out on a piece of mylar, that'll be another nice little step. There's several nice little steps instead of trying to take a big chunk and then you're kind of frustrated at the end of the day when you don't finish it. So today if we can finish these, that'll be one nice step in the bank here. These came out pretty nice, by the way. Pretty good. Now looking at this, basically I just want to repeat what I did yesterday, do it in small amounts. Again, it's real frustrating to me because obviously what I'd like to do is just work to midnight every night on this stuff, but what generally happens is, I have to work in small chunks of time, and if you plan out one job at a time, usually it can be, you say, well, at least I got that accomplished today. Now it's one step out of the way, or whatever. Anyway, that looks like how this is all panning out anyway. Anyway, it's just a repeat really of what we did yesterday to get the other side in, the notch, and then to lay these out, and the next thing is going to be to cut the holes in the ribs. Yeah, we're closing in on having the last little bit of this. Now we're ready to do the sanding block. And then we'll be ready to really pull these apart. Trailing it, you actually can see the center line coming through on all the parts since we've worked off a center line. You just want to kiss that block, just kiss the plywood, but not change the shape. The last step is just to do our little notch. Such an important thing to get the notches just right, because if they are just a nice tight fit on those 1/4 inch pieces, the wing almost goes together. At least you can frame it up, get it in pieces without the usual gluing it. You can just hold it together with the press fits. reason we're spending even a little bit of extra time on this is because these are going to be permanent patterns. And it may be that we want to build this wing for the next 10 years, or that 8, 10, 15 other people are going to want to borrow these. So we'd like these to really be accurate if possible. Now, I guess everybody has a little anticipation the first time you take the templates off. And you can see your handiwork evolved into a really nice set of ribs. So each rib has a center line right now. And you can see the center line carries through. We also have the notch up here, the notch for our when we go to put our spar in place. Next step, I'm taking each rib and putting the appropriate number on each one, starting at the root, so that if I drop them on the floor, I just don't have to spend my whole day lining them back up. Now these parts still have an angle in them, and I have to account for that, of course. They still have, even though we've done that multiple offset thing, we still need to account for the angle that's in all the parts. Next thing I do after getting the numbers on is where I have this angle on, I want to get right to the high point, so that at least that part of it now is square. It sometimes needs a little tweaking when you don't have a, a real accurate layout here. Now I'm lining up that center line there, this center line here, and then I'm lining up just a little scrap piece of 1/4 inch square to make sure that when I fit that in a rib, it comes out right on the center line. Because here's what can really happen. Sometimes you've got this off just a little bit, and then what happens is the center, you're using the center line, I do anyway, for my reference for a center line later on. And if this were down like that, obviously the whole wing would be off just a little bit. So I try to just make sure that that's perfectly true, and that when I sight down there, of course the point of this, you can't see it with my big fingers there, when that's lined up, that we're right on center there. Things I always do right at the very end is I do the double stack. In other words, I stack them all toward the front. Make sure they roll down. And while they roll down, just sight down to see that. And usually you can, if one is out, you can look right down it and see. But then also taking my ever-present piece of leading edge stock and making sure that I still have a 90-degree angle in that. Next thing, stacking it the other way. I've got all the backs trimmed even. Now what I do is, because there's still a little bit of an angle here, I just touch this with the block. I'm not changing the shape, I'm just taking a little bit of the angle out, and then go back this way, because sanding that angle out just makes it difficult. If you were using these for ribs, it really wouldn't matter that much, but because we're going to use them as templates, I want to have that even. And so what I've done is just true this up in this dimension, so everything is nice and straight. And then at some point in time I can just lay them down, and I'm going to start laying out the holes now, because I'm going to build this wing. There's many good ways to build a wing. Bobby Hunt's method, Geo wing, I-beam wing, but the method I'm going to use on this one, and I want to have the templating done, is 2 3/8 holes 5 inches apart, and I need to lay that out right now and make a little jig up so that I can snap each rib in and get the holes accurately on center. Now again, there's a lot of ways you can do this. Just give you an example of one of the ways you can do this if you really don't want to make a jig. You can line up each one and figure out exactly where it is on center, of course, pin it, and then come from the back and punch holes in it. But it's easier. I'm going to make a little bridge on this so that I can just push each rib in and just drop it right in place. Takes about 5 minutes to make the jig, and then every one will be exactly the same. So our new belt sander we just got, dying to use it too. Okay, so I laid out a nice straight piece with a center line on to begin with. To make this fixture, what I did, I just laid out a center line, took my template, traced out two 3/8 inch holes. They're exactly 5 inches on center, and these are the same thickness that the blocks that hold the rods up off the table are. I just want to drill it just a couple of thousandths thinner so I can get a real nice press fit on there when I push the tubing in. I'm trying to make up a base plate, just ordinary 16th balsa, where this will confine the rib. When I shove the rib in, that'll keep my center line. I can then line up the center line, and my template will be glued. I'm going to put some 1/16 braces on here to space it up. I'll be able to slide the rib in, and then it'll already have the holes in place, and cut it with a brass tube. So just making up a little fixture like this should be hopefully going to be a good way to do this, and something that when somebody wants to borrow the ribs and the templates, this will already be in the little kit for them to use. Again, a nice thing about a jig like this, once you make it up, and this is only a matter of maybe 15 minutes, I'm going to use these nice little John Pothier pins to hold this in position. And I've checked to see that all the ribs, from the biggest to the smallest, they all fit into that notch and they line up the center line. Then I just need to glue this in place, and this will center my, once I get the center line and the center line and the center line, and I can just run my brass tubes down. I took a piece of 3/8 tubing, sharpened it of course on the belt sander, put a little edge on it. Another trick for getting nice clean holes here is run a blade along the inside. Now keep in mind, this is a razor blade. Now I just put a drop of CA on this, and this is one of the precision drills, but you could use a piece of tubing. This just happens to be a tool I had, very convenient, and that's a very tight fit in there, and all it takes is maybe one twist and you've got perfect holes. It's a good idea to do this over one of those XL cutting pads. I'm just doing this for the purpose of showing on camera. When you're all done, slide the rib out. And you should have holes that, in theory at least, they're right on center. And you could always check this if you wanted to. Another good way to do this would just be turn it upside down if you were in doubt, and run the piece right through again, checking the center line. But in this case, we know these are pretty accurate. Once you make this little fixture that you can slide it in, it's really made with nothing but a couple of pieces of scrap wood. Once you have this, every set of ribs that you're ever going to use, because we're going to make, I think Midgley has 5-inch aluminum blocks that the rods are 5-inch on center. So that'll just add one other thing that we can make for the people that are going to be building the exact same wing. I'll just put the rest of them right on. It'd be a 5-minute job to get the rest of them with all the accurate rod holes. Another thing is a piece of the rod we're going to use, stainless steel rod. We want to make sure we have a very accurate fit on there. I want it tight, but I don't want it that I'm pressing it in and I'll never be able to get the rod out. The first couple times I did this, getting the rod out was a problem. This will be a nice fit. These are rods I got. These are tubes actually that I got from Joe Adamusco, but I only have one of them, so I'm going to need to get a rod too. Ordinary Home Depot 3/8 steel rod, or you can get the thing from Joe Adamusco. He has an address that you can get this from. Okay, now we have all the rod holes in, and the next thing is I want to put the lightning holes in, which also are going to double as the holes for the lead out wires. Now, because each rib is an individual entity here, what I'm trying to do is lay out lightning holes in such a way each rib has to be figured out individually to be a pattern. But I also want to leave, for instance, if I have a lightning hole around this rod hole, I need to leave that material there until the rods are removed and the wing is built. Now you can just get an idea of how that works out on the tip rib. The tip rib, out at the tip, it's kind of cut and dry how these lightning holes are going to be put in. But as you work your way in toward the root, you need to allow for, see what's happening, that rod hole is working its way over there. So what happens eventually, you wind up with something like this, where you have to come up with, let me just move this over, you have to come up with leaving that little piece of wood there until the wing is actually built, and then we can just get in there with a knife and just cut that away. But each one is a separate entity. By the gear blocks, I just want to leave just enough. Now obviously I'll need to remove this piece of material after the wing is built, but by leaving that little piece in there, it makes lining up the wing on the rods extremely easy. When you get down in by the, and we'll be making doublers and triplers and everything for the gear blocks. So some of them, in this case, once the rods are removed, I can get in there and just, I always mark it just to make it easy for myself, but basically laying each one out. Again, once somebody does this and you have a set of patterns, wow, each one can just be a little bit different. But once the patterns are done, making a couple of sets of ribs is just a couple hours of work at best. So yeah, the one in by the fuselage, I want to leave as much material there as possible. On number 2, we're already outside the fuselage, and I'll remove this afterwards. But what I'm going to do now is lay out all the ribs in a pattern so I can see what I have as a final result here, and that's probably all I'm going to get done today. But getting this much done, I'm right about at the point now where I can sit down and make a full set of ribs right from these templates. So the next session I get to work on this should be very easy to do. Once this part is done, it's done for everybody all the time. Okay, the next time we get to work on a session, what we're going to be able to do is we should be able to make the 2 sets of ribs from these templates in one sitting. Now today what I did, I took the ribs that I had made yesterday, took them one by one. Now because I'm going to be using the edge of these over and over and over again, I'd like to kind of harden it up. So what I did, I took a Q-tip. I tried this on one to see how this was going to work. It seems to work okay, which means it probably doesn't work too well. Took a Q-tip and some thin CA and just went right along the edge of each rib. Then I took an ink marker pen, one of these Sharpie markers. And the reason I did this was I wanted, first off, my eyes are not that good, and I wanted to form a cutting edge here that I could use over and over again. It wouldn't start to be a problem with the knife catching on it. And I went around each rib, all of the areas that I'm going to cut, just back and forth over and over again until that edge got nice and black. Because what I'm going to do when I actually put this on the wood that I'm going to use, I want to be able to see that edge. And what happens if it's balsa wood and you don't have if that edge isn't hard and you come around the corner with a brand new XL blade, then that's the end of it. Anyway, I've found this to be a big help. We're almost ready to cut ribs. I need to go get that sea grain wood that I put aside, and I want to lay each one of these out and start cutting the ribs that I'm actually going to use. But all of the edges, including the edges inside and including the holes for the rods, I put a thin coat of CA along. And that's one of the things that I hope is going to maintain some of the integrity with this. These won't fall apart or get deteriorated after using them 3 or 4 or 5 times. Telltale sign of the times. I went and took the box of the group of sea grain that I had just taken aside from sorting the wood. And I had a pile that I had set aside from last year, sea grain, put aside for wood. And I'm looking at them, and I want to go through them, and I'm looking at the prices. you know, like totally different. In 1 year, the price has gone up on everything. Anyway, just little mementos, little things you need to know. So what I'm going to do anyway is go through all of the wood now. This is only the sea grain wood. And I'm going to take out, I need 10 sheets to make 30 ribs. I'm going to take the 10 lightest pieces, but only the lightest sea grain. So obviously the trick is just go by, weigh all the wood, and put it in order of heaviest on one end of the pile, lightest on the other end. Work off the light end. When your friends come over for a free piece of wood, take it off the heavy end. That always seems to work well for me. Right up in a corner on each piece of wood. And believe me, even though Sig hand picks this wood, the variation can be tremendous on it. It can be very high. We've got some that's 3 grams difference already. Now I'm really shocked. Some of this wood is really, if you didn't go through and weigh this, you could add the amount of the airplane that's wood, you could add 1/3 to the weight. I've got some that are 9 and some that are 15. So you can imagine it's almost 50% heavier, and it all comes, of course they don't have control of it, it all comes as 4 to 6 pound contest wood from Sig. Tremendous variation. Always pays to weigh the wood and grade it yourself. It's funny, when you see somebody at the Nats with a real light airplane, and you see 2 people like Billy Werwich builds a plane, comes out 52 ounces, and then somebody else builds the same plane, it comes out 70, you wonder if they weighed every piece of wood. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But a lot of people underestimate this part of the job. They want to take, that's 4 to 6 pound wood, just run off and build a plane. This is one of the steps that can really make it worth your while in the end, especially if you're using sea grain wood. If you can get sea grain wood and get the lightest sea grain wood, wow, are you ahead of the game from the guy who just takes it off the shelf and just goes and builds. Another thing, when you take, we're going to need 10 sheets altogether. When we take the 10 sheets, we'll cut from the lightest of the wood, we'll cut the inboard ribs. I mean, every step of the way, we'll try to get all the real super lightweight stuff on that inboard wing, just to save that doubling up of the tip weight as we go along. Here's just an idea from that batch of wood we've gotten. They've gone as low as, these are 4" by 36 by 16. It goes down as low as 9, and I've had lower than that, but you get into that area where, how many do you get? 1 per 100 sheets. The bulk of them are around 11 or 12. And they go all the way down. Now just imagine if you had gone to a hobby shop and just, well, whatever, just picked out this little group of wood. You'd be 50% heavier before you even started the model. So this little step, even though it might take a half an hour, whatever amount of time, this is one of the steps that, no matter what you do, this is always worthwhile to grade the wood. That's one of the things I think is always worthwhile. And we'll put the rest back, keep it in order, like I said, so we can work off the light end of the pile and give away the heavy end of the pile. One of the things when I lay these out, I have to be real conscious of the grain, and in this case the grain goes straight. So I want to make, let me get my template, I want to make a center line on here. The first thing is I want to get, and if you do this, I only need to do this once, and you pretty much can just replicate it. I'm looking at the grain of the wood. A lot of times the grain of the wood is going up or down. These sound like a lot of small insignificant things until you have a wing that's warped. And in this case, when you put the amount of hours that we generally put into one of these wings, I like to have every assurance that it's going to be as straight as possible, especially when you're using very light wood. So I get a center line on here. Try to use a fine line. I don't know if this is a pilot pen or what. I had some real nice fine line pens when a year or two ago, and I don't know where they're all gone by now. So you see, this is the kind of stuff you run into. That's the next trip to Staples. I'm going to find some real fine line pens. Anyway, I lay this right on the center line now. So I have 3 things lined up at the same time: the center line, the grain of the wood, and the template. And getting this accurate is not. This is where it's nice to have this extra, the black on here. And I like to use at least 6 pins. These are these razor pins John Pothier has gotten me. I think they come from Indy RC, but I'm not sure. Anyway, and I'm trying to pin it in 6 different spots per rib, except I want to make sure I'm right on the center line. And getting the pins as far to the outside of the template as possible without interfering with the actual cut is of course desirable. Now this is another spot, and I say it over and over again. I know a lot of people say, oh boy, you say that over and over about putting a new blade in. Yeah, and then as soon as they do it, they say, ah, thanks for that great tip. Anyway, I had a real nice call today from an RC flyer that's been watching a lot of videos, and he's picking up a lot of ideas that he can apply right even to RC building, especially with the Brodak dope. Okay, so this is centered on with all the pins. I have a brand new blade, and I'm using that. This is why I like to have the edge of the rib firmed up with that thin CA, because I get a little edge I can work off. And this is a part of the job that, you know, can be nice and relaxing here. I have a nice big cup of coffee over there on the counter. There's 30 ribs in this wing, so whatever, if one takes 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you can pretty much figure out how long it's going to take to make a whole set. Going to use the lightest ribs to make the inboard set, the lightest wood, even though that may sound like a little overkill, it isn't. Every little bit. Once you have a plane built and it's 70 ounces, you can't go back in and get that extra ½ ounce out. Now the other thing is I have the template, I have the little guy to put the holes in. As soon as I pull that out, now I can work off the other edge. And again, that's why it's nice to have those edges hardened up with the thin CA. That makes it real. Exactly the same spot, so when I lay out the inner wing, the lightest of the ribs will be on the inner side, the heavier set will be on the outer side. Now last night I worked long and hard to finish up these ribs. In fact, Karen was getting kind of annoyed. But I've wound up. Now what's nice is I start off a new day with the ribs already finished. I have the templates that I'm going to put in permanent storage, the thing for notching, have my 2 sets of ribs ready to go. I need to do a little strengthening of the ribs that have the gear blocks, and I want to put a little tiny spar piece on each rib, but I want to get rid of right away. I want to get rid of all of the templates, so the only thing I'm working with right now is going to be what actually will be our 2 sets of ribs. By the way, you can see my fingers are really chewed up. I had a little milling machine accident last night, late last night, working too late. I should have been drinking more coffee. Now another thing I did, I made sure when I made the sets, I marked each one in terms of the number and inboard, same number and outboard. Obviously the reason is on the inboard we used the lightest of the wood, on the outboard we used the next lightest. So I wanted to have that referenced when I actually had the rib sets. I didn't want to then put the light set on the outboard wing panel. Now the first thing before I go any further, once I'm done, every once in a while, people that haven't watched videos in a long time know, boy, that's a dumb thing to do. I always get a new blade and a table scraper because there's always little dots of CA, epoxy, little things that I can't get. In fact, you can see them coming up here. So I like to clean off the glass table. Even though we're going to be building this on a jig, when I do this part, I don't want to ding up the ribs now. I spent a lot of time getting them real nice. And you can see some of the stuff this picks up. It's amazing how much junk is on this table. The table perfectly clean before the next step. I'm going to take my best piece of sea grain, the lightest piece that I still have left. I want to find the hardest spot, the spot where it's the most sea grain. Make the equivalent of cap strips. I'm going to use these to strengthen the ribs. And the parts of the ribs that are by the gear blocks, I'm going to do multiple pieces with the grain going in each direction. I found that to be lighter than plywood. But for right now, this will be a nice way, and you'd be amazed how much this stiffens up the ribs. When you take a rib, just as an example what I'm going to do here, I'm going to cut each piece real accurately and just lay one piece in it. That one little piece, when you're building a wing, you can press down, you don't get that flexing in there. It's worth its weight in gold having that in there. And needless to say, we're just going to get a brand new tube of CA. And like I said, I'm going to answer the phone. Now what's funny is, the first time I did this, I thought, oh yeah, that's going to add 1 grain to the plane. But that really makes the rib, when you're actually making the wing and leaning on it and pressing on it, boy, that's worth its weight in gold. And I'll do that to all the ribs except the gear block ones, and those will have this piece tripled with sea grain going in 2 different directions in the ultimate part. Originally gave me some of this sheet Teflon, and this is what I use on a landing gear. And this is real handy also for another reason. When you go to lay one of these out, glue doesn't stick to it. So if you happen to know Dave, or if you go buy, I guess wax paper would be okay. What happens if you don't get all the glue, if some of it drips around the back, you don't wind up with a part sticking. And of course, this is a great time. I always go out and get brand new fresh glue. Fresh. I have 10 things that are a year old. When I'm starting to build actual joints that are going to go in the model, I want fresh, nothing but fresh CA. And epoxy, of course. Now on the gears, I've marked these here, that are going to retain, the blocks are going to sit right up here. So what? I've put the grain completely opposite to the rib. And this, with that reinforcement in it, that's just going to be perfectly solid. Famous last words, of course. And I could dress that off. And also take a little round sanding tool and make sure I have a nice fit on the rod. I want a tight fit, but I don't want a press fit. And one of the things in laying out the preliminary layout of the wing here, and I've been standing back over and over again, made my original preliminary sketch, laid out the ribs, and one of the things I wanted to do that I haven't done, I laid out exactly in full scale where the gear were going to be on this model. The only problem was I originally envisioned the gear being a little closer together like a Spitfire, and I realized after looking at some pictures of Mustangs and Miss Ashley, the gear is further out. So I'm going to move the gear further out. Of course, that's what's nice about having templates. I can just put the reinforcements on the two outer ribs and just cut up two new ribs closer into the fuselage. And I marked the old gear location where I originally thought it would be with an 18-inch spread, and I'm going to put it at 24 inches just to make it a little more scale-like. And the problem with all these things is, when you're trying to make any semi-scale model, the difficulty always is everything is a compromise. Virtually everything is a compromise. And even on the drawings, until you lay it out, and I sketched this out in full size, I wasn't really sure if this was going to be what I wanted. And that's why I do everything with pencil and tracing paper. Again, because so used to the idea that the P-51, in my mind's eye, it looks a certain way. And the old Spitfire gear were 18 inches apart. And when I laid this out, well, this would be an advantage, but I wanted to have the ribs made first so I could get the plans made accurately right off the ribs, rather than the other way around where you draw plans and then, oops, the ribs were a little bit too big or too small. So I'll do it off camera. It's just redundant. I'm just going to make up a couple of other ribs here and make the replacement ribs, and then we'll pick this up in tomorrow's session. Now, as long as we're all excited and crazy about P-51s here, let's take a break from working on a wing. Got some pictures today from Ken Clapson, and this is a plane he was working on this summer. He's got a Jet 60, a windy pipe, and he's busy working on trying to finish this up, and he's promised, Ken promised, that he would be very aggressive about getting some more pictures for me so that we would see this in various stages of silver. I believe, and unless my email was wrong, that he's already sanding the Brodak silver. Now, it's funny, and I guess it's okay to say this on the video, it was real difficult to get him the Brodak dope up in Canada. In fact, we had to do a little bit of almost something that bordered on being illegal to get it up to him, but we finally got it to him anyway. And you can see the old Tsunami, the scoop, and the outlet for the scoop for the jet. Got the Jet 60, the scoop on the top. This ought to be a real nice plane, and I hope soon, Ken, we're going to be getting some more pictures of it. Anyway, from Ken Clapson in Alberta, Canada. Really look forward to seeing this. Now, Paul Winter has a Tsunami. I have a Tsunami. Had a Tsunami. Anyway, when you talk about P-51s, this is the look that a lot of people seem to like. Set of plans roughed out. The next step on this whole project is going to be, I have the old aluminum blocks, and Midgley said he'd make me some new blocks, but I don't have them, and I want to get started on this, so I'll have a spare set when he sends me his. I need to lay out the exact hole spacing in the aluminum. Obviously the two rods have to go through. Now, you know, in a pinch you could make this out of 1/8" plywood, since it's only going to hold the rods up off the table. But if you happen to have a piece of aluminum, and because we work in a machine shop, some of the time we do, it's real easy to find a piece of aluminum. Angle iron would be fine, heavy plywood, anything that'll locate the two holes the same distance up off the table. Now yesterday what happened is, in the middle of working on these templates, I got interrupted with some customers here in the shop. What I need to do is, on these aluminum bars, I need to lay out two new holes. I was thinking I could possibly use one of these, but they're up kind of high. And I want to lay these out and see if I have any real chance of getting them into two new. It's not really going to be possible. So instead what I'll do is I'll turn the bars upside down. The only reason I put the tape on there is I don't have any bluing. Bluing is a material like paint, like nail polish, that you put on aluminum so you can put accurate scratches. But we have it all down the shop, and obviously none of it's up here. Well, what I want to do is I want to get on a relatively accurate set of holes. Again, I always use the little, I don't know if I've shown this before, the little holes. And these are really fine point, the little Pilot razor point pens that seem to work well for this. Same way I put center lines on. This is a good way to get your center lines figured out. And you can see it leaves a nice fine line on there. And what I'm looking for is that the two holes are 5 inches apart and parallel from the top of what will be the base of the jig. Just trying to get an accurate gauge here, because I want to have the back piece flat from the trailing edge. Obviously these pieces are oversized, but doesn't really matter. This will just give me a rough. Just a little double check that I'm not off by any amount. We'll go over to the drill press and drill these out. Way to make sure that the two holes are the same in both pieces of aluminum is I've clamped them together, laid them flat on the table, made sure this edge is parallel, and I'm going to spot, just put a small drill right on center, and then check it with my ruler and with my template to make sure I have this right on center before I go and drill out the big hole. Now the reason for that is if the drill happens to walk or move up, what I can do is just reverse these pieces, or I could even take, if the holes don't come out as accurate as I want them to, I can just move over a little bit. So I have I don't want to throw away two big pieces of aluminum like this. I want to mic the rod. Yeah, it's really a little over 375. This isn't real. This is rod, not tubing. Okay. I just put a little dot on the tape, and now I can see I need to do a little. We're not talking about thousandths of an inch. This is not an engine liner or something, but I would like to get it kind of accurate, since we do use these templates over and over. That might not be comfortable drilling aluminum, it's really not a good idea to pull a drill and hold it down. You want to put the drill in, pick it up, let it release the chip. The slower you drill a hole, the better. You won't wear the drill out. Take a bite, release the drill, take a bite, release the drill. I find it that way the drills last a lot longer, at least in a machine shop environment. If you're drilling a lot of holes, you might want to use a little bit of cutting oil. For this, I don't want to get any oil on this part. Now this is really just a pilot hole. And I'm drilling both pieces at once. To have a nice set of drills. And by the way, a set of these drills, I've seen these on sale for under $50 locally. Usually they're about $70, $80, but having a whole set of number and letter drills, a good idea if you're doing any kind of serious modeling. Anyway, get one exactly the size of the rod plus about 2/1000. This way we'll get hopefully get a real nice fit on the rods. What I'd like to have, I want to be able to press the rods in, but I don't want them slopping around and flopping around. I'd like it to just be a nice press fit on the rods. By the way, another thing I've learned many times, if you're even new to using drilling this kind of heavy material with big drills, if you're in doubt, you could always take an extra clamp and clamp this to the table. In this case, you can see how I have this. I'm holding it with my hand. Is never go on a piece like this and hold it with your fingertips. That's especially when you're drilling this thick of a material. As it tends to go through, it'll definitely bite. Set of these drills. This is really a good investment. I'm always of the opinion, you see, here's what happens when you wind up with a drill like this, full of drills, and every time you need to go find a drill, it's a pain in the neck. If you have a nice set like this, you tend to keep them all in order, and I keep the ones upside down that I use all the time so I don't have to go back and forth miking them. Alright, we got the plates drilled out. I like to take an oversized drill and just cut that edge. I don't want to have a razor edge there. And I'll take these over to the sanding table. I just don't want to have an edge that I'm going to wind up cutting my fingers on. Or that when I loan these out to people, and these guys have been all over the country already when we were using the original rods, it's typical good machine shop practice to break that edge anyway. You don't really even need a fancy tool. You just need a drill that's a little bit bigger. See, I want a nice tight fit, but I don't want to have to force this in. That looks just about like what I'm looking for, right about there. I just want to check that I have got the holes that I'm looking for. And I want to make sure the dimension to the trailing edge is usable. That's good. Now obviously once you have a set of these, and if you change the spacing, you can move up. You can use the same thing over and over again. You don't need to go buy a new piece of aluminum each time. And in our case, we try to make things as flexible as possible. And you also want to be absolutely sure that they're one right on top of the other, that they're perfect. Okay, just a few thoughts here. At this point in any construction job, we have some ways to build wings. There's a lot of ways, and in the past, and we've probably documented most, if not all of these. Let's go right through the most. I'm sure everybody who started building at some point in time, you built in your lap. And I remember years ago building Nobler wings, one right after another. And a lot of times those wings, well, at least mine were anyway. Building in your lap, there was always a certain amount of ambroid pins, and your lap really almost never resulted in a perfectly straight wing. Now in my case, years went by, and what I did, and I was so happy when I did this, I went out and got a door. And I used to take on top of the door, put a piece of Homosote, and that really wasn't that, and you'd put pins and ambroid, geez, I don't know. That was another one that I don't know, maybe the wings were a little bit better, maybe they weren't. Always hard to tell. Then I got to the next level of this, and I'm only going through my own little adventure in the world of model aviation, is where I'd have a flat door, and I'd have a flat piece of glass on top. Well, that seemed to work a whole lot better, especially if the glass was, you know, reasonable. And what I would do is I would shim the glass, and I've done this on video many times, by taking a string and going corner to corner, basically in these dimensions. And if for instance, in the middle of this, I'll exaggerate this, if the surface is like this, and you stretch a string, you'll notice there's a gap here. You know, you have to shim the middle, and usually thin glass is relatively flexible. The other thing, if you know the glass is like this, and you know there's a piece under the string, well, a string is always going to be perfectly flat unless you have a 6 or an 8 foot ruler. But anyway, by doing these dimensions, you can pretty much, and I used to shim with IBM cards and whatever, get this flat. But the whole objective here is you need to get a flat building surface. This year, we're one step ahead of, we hope we are anyway. What we have is a table that's relatively flat. On top of the table, we have a piece of 1/2 inch glass that's shimmed relatively flat. And on top of that, and again, this is something we're doing for the first time, we have a piece of marble that Mike Kajeski got at a tombstone place, and I'm not sure he paid for it. I'm not sure. He says he found it, but I don't know. There's probably a name on the other side of it. But we have kind of a sandwich. But the objective, again, is to have a surface, and I don't know how much truer than a piece of solid marble, is to have a true surface. Now, it doesn't matter how you do it. If you had unlimited money, if your father was Donald Trump, you could get a granite machinist plate, which would probably be a couple of $1,000s. Well, you know, most of us are not that rich. In fact, I'm not, for sure. But anyway, the objective is always to build on a flat surface, because that's your reference point. Now, this is only step one. Step one is to establish, no matter how you do it, and these are just some of the ways, the objective is to establish a perfectly flat building surface, and it doesn't matter how you do it. You can use, if you can use a butcher block table, or you can use any number of ways, it just turns out, and because I'm trying to videotape various ways of doing it, we've already videotaped this way, we've already videotaped some of the other ways, but this is one of the ways. If you can establish, I'm hoping that this is going to be real successful, this marble piece, or if you can have a table that's perfectly flat. Anything that's perfectly flat is going to work well. And once you have a flat, true surface, and it doesn't matter if you check it with straight edges, laser lights. Home Depot sells a little laser light thing that's kind of cool. Don't need to make this real exciting. A piece of dental floss is all you need to check level. Once you have it, then you need to decide, and then you have a decision to make here, the ways to build. And there are several. Once you have that surface, one of the choices that you would have, and I would say it's an excellent one, is the lost foam method that Bob Hunt has evolved, whereby you take a foam core, put it on a flat table, and build a wing with geodetic or straight ribs. That's a way that certainly is an excellent way to build a wing. This would be foam. We built a wing similar to that. Tsunami was built in a similar way using a foam core, a foam cradle. But notice what we're trying to establish, and it doesn't matter how you establish it, is that this surface is always going to be equal. We're building a parallel wing with the center line of the wing parallel to the table. Another way, and years ago this was a way that boy, I wish I could remember how many Aries and Cobras and things I built. You would put a center line on the fuselage itself, and you would build off the beam of the wing, but you'd always be referencing down to this flat table. You had to have a flat table to realistically make a straight I-beam wing, and then you could lay in your ribs, but you'd always have this flat table, and the flatter the table is, obviously, it's pretty simple, the truer the wing is. We've done many times, and Joe Adamusco is one of the ones that's a big proponent, and I've videotaped it many times, the different wings we've made using the plates that we just made that hold two rods. And the objective is that these rods, the center line of the two rods, becomes the center line of the wing, often an imaginary plane, and by sliding the ribs on here, we can always measure this dimension down to here. But you're never going to have it. If the table is crooked, well then what good is measuring down? You've got to establish this, and it may not be in, and I wouldn't say this, that you need to do this in thousandths of an inch with a micrometer, but certainly within a 1/16 of an inch would be reasonable to build that wing. Now, this is the method we're going to use, and we're going to use Mike's Tombstone, which has a real flat plate, which is on top of a piece of glass, which is true, which is on top of a solid mahogany table, which is true. All of these things combined, I hope the net result is that this surface is going to be perfectly true. And also what it's going to allow me to do is constantly reference up off the table and get this exactly true. I don't want to leave old Tom Morris out of this. His method, which is a variation of, he calls it the Lincoln log method, but it's certainly a good method. And I've been excited about trying it. It's just that this time through the gap, we're going to use the method, the tried and true method, because what we're looking to do this winter is build two separate airplanes, or two fuselages for the same plane. But again, the Lincoln log method, it's doing, all any method is doing. And by the way, the box method, which is on video too, another good way, is simply to glue two pieces of 3-inch wood with a center line on them in the perimeter of around the wing plan, and then lay your ribs in with the center line, and in effect you box in the wing, put a center line on all sides, and then drop the ribs in. Well, this is kind of a cool way to do it, and we've done it on video already. In fact, we've done all of these, and Bob Hunt, by the way, has an excellent video using his method. We have the Spitfire done this way. We have a Strega, I believe, how many other planes, how many Spitfires Joe has done. But we need to get, maybe next year we'll use Tom Morris's method. Again, by having all these choices, what it gives you, you have a choice of what's the most convenient way for you to build a straight wing. And these are just some of the things that the decisions we've had to go through before we're actually going to lay out the plans and the jig and lay out this wing. I always try to remind people of is when you're making a selection of how you want to build a wing, it's not a contest. It's like you don't get points to find the most complicated, difficult way to build a wing. You pick a way that suits you. If you have an inclination to build I-beam planes with all the ribs and like the I-beam Spitfire or like an Aries, and I believe Bob Hunt has a video on building the I-beam wings the Billy Werwidge way, yep. Well, why not check them all out? You know, why not try each method once and see which way you like the best? Some people, you know, they're going to just point blank like foam wings. That's the easiest way they can get a plane in the air. Hey, nothing wrong with foam wings. Some people like geo wings. You know, certainly a lot of people have come to build some really pretty planes with the geo wing. That's kind of cool. And certainly you can't discount the good old-fashioned traditional rod method where the rods hold the ribs in place. But remember, this is the key. The key to all of modeling is it's not a contest. There are many ways Just like there are many motors, there are many finishing methods. And the choice is, if you try all of these methods, you'll find a way that works for you. I've been looking at this piece of marble for quite a while now in the shop and trying to figure out exactly how I want to do this, because what I want to do is at the end of this video have a permanent fixture for the next person down the road that's going to make this wing. Now, we did this with Mike's wooden jig. Mike has a wooden jig that he's built several wings off. In fact, Jacobone, several other people have built wings off. But this marble jig, we're going to put even a little more time and effort into. As far as laying out the plans, we have the plans finalized for the new wing, the new airfoiled wing. And we want to get, the next step in this is going to be to lay this out and actually mark out the ribs. Set up the jig. This is probably one of the handiest tools I've ever purchased. If you have a glass tabletop, or in this case we're going to try to use marble, one of the things you always wind up with is little drops of CA, epoxy, dope, things that you want to get off the table. Now, before I set up the marble, again, I go real carefully over the table, because once I start doing a fin, you can see how much, just get in one swipe how much has come off. I want to get a perfectly clean table to lay that piece of marble on. I don't want to have it scratch up any more than it has to. And the first step in anything, even if we were going to build on the glass, is going to be, and I hope we'll get to do this today, but you never know. See, part of what you never know is you never know how much time you're going to have for building, and a lot of times the phone will ring. Keep in mind we're in a shop environment. The phone rings and sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes it's more than an hour. And now with the internet, a lot of times the email will be cranking away. Anyway, I want to start with, and this is such a useful tool, get whatever surface you have perfectly clean before I pick up this marble and put it on here. And believe me, this marble is heavy. This is a heavy piece of stuff. Wow. Oh my God, this thing is heavy. Now, Kajeski brought this in here and it looked like it was about 20, oops, for a hole in a wall. This thing is really heavy. But what we're going to try to do is make a wing jig out of it. And a jig that we can share with other people. I don't know how they're going to pick this up though, unless they have a truck. But that is a cutoff from a tombstone. And I want to have it sitting right off the end of the table here if possible. Before I set it up. Now, I don't know if you can appreciate just how flat a piece of marble like this is, but it's not subject to moisture like wood is. I've checked this in pretty much in all the dimensions. It looks like it's flat, but in fact when you look down it, oh my God, if I could build a wing, maybe we should make wings out of marble. Anyway, that's really nice and straight. Now what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to run a couple of drops of CA once I position this along the edge, just so, God forbid, somebody bumps into this and it slides off the table. And if this drops on your foot, believe me, it's going to ruin your whole day. Now what I did, I tried to put a couple of drops of CA on this, and I'm not happy that the CA is holding the way it should. So again, I'm just going to take a little bit of this, mix it right on the glass, lay this right on the glass. This is just ordinary 5-minute epoxy. I want to ensure that somebody bumps up on this and this doesn't wind up, can you imagine, on your foot? Oh, that would be a problem. And of course when I get this off, I'll just have to very carefully soak some acetone on that. Just laying out the ribs, because obviously at the root it's fine. I want to get some idea of if I need to make this any adjustments. Now, as an example, this edge is finished, so I don't even see any reason to even dress that off. Mike, you're okay. And by the way, Mike has a second one of these. I think he's going to be going in the stolen tombstone business pretty soon. But anyway, this is a piece, and I'm sure they made some kind of marble or granite countertop out of this. It's exactly the size of our new Miss Ashley wing. Now the next step is to line up, and you can see what I've done when I drilled the new holes. I drilled them so that we'd have one flat reference point here for our trailing edge, because I want to glue the trailing edge right down to the table, of course, and I want to have the rods as just an additional way of holding that wing perfectly straight during the whole construction process. It's hard to believe. If you lay out the wing to where these parts have to be, one of the things you find out is right down at the other end, I mean, Mike, come on. We just made it. We didn't make it by a whole lot either. Anyway, the next thing I need to do is plot out. I want to get all of the lines. Actually, I'm not going to use the plan. I want to put the lines right down on the marble. I want to see what kind of ink. Maybe I have some indelible ink or some paint or something I can paint those lines on. That's the next thing I want to do. Okay, I'm referencing off to the hinge line so that I have the hinge line parallel for the whole piece, and then of course I'll use the tri-square to just lay out all the ribs in the exact location. The center one is 2.5, which is what we use so that the center ribs you want right under the fuselage, and the other ribs, traditionally a 2-inch rib spacing is what people use. Now I had wanted to get this whole jig set up on the end of this tape before the end, but believe me, it's not going to happen. We're near the end of this tape, and I want to make sure I'm referencing right off the hinge line, and it's very accurate. But it looks like we're going to be finishing this on the next tape. So, almost like Flash Gordon, huh? Now you can get an idea before we get to the end. I just line up the tri-square. Why do I call it a tri-square? It's a triangle. So used to being a carpenter. In my previous life I must have been a carpenter. Anyway, and I can just go down now and trace out each rib. Once I take the plan up, then I can continue these lines right to the end of the jig. Anyway, we always have people that say, oh, gee, these tapes, that's too long. Oh, you put too many details in. Why don't you just skip over some? And then you have the same amount of, exactly the same amount of people that say, gee, you missed a step. Show me that step. Show me drawing rib 3 in or something. So I'm always walking a tightrope. Not so sure I'm walking and not going to fall. Okay, all those lines now, they look like they're going to stay on there permanent. This is a permanent marker, but there's no guarantee they're going to stay there. Those are for our reference. And once we remove the plans, of course now the only thing left is to trace all these lines. And again, they can just go off into infinity. They don't, because we have a reference point here. As long as we have that reference point. And hey, I hope you've gotten some good information from the video. As always, please share the videos with all your friends. And I'll trace all these lines out. This'll pretty much set the end of this tape up. Okay, now those are all our rib stations, and they're all perfectly parallel. And that's about all we're going to get on the end of this video. We'll see you on the next tape. And we'll be ready to pick this up.